Okay, thank you everyone for joining. As always, just give me a thumbs up to make sure that everything looks okay, sounds okay, and once I get your marks of approval, we'll move on. Awesome. Looks like we are good to go. If there's any issues during the broadcast, just hit me up in the chat and we will fix it. Thank you all for joining. This is day 8, the final day of this tranche of the January 6th committee hearings. We obviously heard Adam Kinzinger a few days ago, I believe it was this past Sunday, announced that we could expect likely another tranche of hearings as more information comes out. We can also expect more hearings if and when the committee releases their final report. So this likely won't be the final hearing that we have, but it's the final hearing in this block of hearings that we're going through right now. Obviously, the January 6th committee in this block over the past 7 hearings, has spoken about the perception of all of this from the point of view of the DOJ, of election workers, of the vice president, White House campaign officials. I believe that far-right militia group members. Cassidy Hutchinson was one. So we've heard, everybody's take on this. Obviously, another really important element of all this is that just about all of these witnesses, except maybe the election workers in Fulton County, Georgia, Shay Moss and Lady Ruby, were Republicans. So again, that's not an accident. It's all on purpose. It's to preempt any claims of partisan witch huntery, which we're hearing anyway, which is the ultimate irony, because again, this is like this committee is co-chaired by Liz Cheney. There's Adam Kinzinger is on this committee, and just about every single witness that we've heard from thus far is a Republican. So, okay, a couple people are saying louder, so I will make this a little bit louder. So with that said, that's the last 7 hearings. Today we should hear more about Donald Trump's point of view, what happened during, I believe, was 187 minutes while the insurrection was actually going on, what he was doing or not doing, more importantly. This obviously promises to be one hell of a hearing. I think that with all of the pains they've taken to make sure that the last 7 hearings were as compelling as they ultimately turned out to be, which is a tall order, because the stakes were the expectations were high for this stuff, and in every single one of these hearings they've exceeded those expectations. We expect this one to be the most explosive, and so given how compelling those last 7 hearings were, for this one to top all of those, I definitely expect it to be worthwhile. Now, as we wait for this hearing to begin, which should start in about an hour, so we'll do this pre-show for about an hour, just want to talk a little bit about the news that's happened in these past few days. There's obviously a ton that's going on, and I'll get back into the January 6th stuff as we get closer to go time. By the way, go time is going to be at, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. So we have about an hour of pre-show right now. And there's a lot to talk about. Sometimes prior to these hearings, I'm like, all right, it's going to be a masterclass in stretching, but there is a ton to talk about right now. So we're going to leave the January 6th stuff to the side for just a moment, and I want to touch on some of what we've seen by the House Republicans and Senate Republicans this past week as they continue their assault against privacy rights in the United States. Just today, the House advanced legislation. They passed legislation out of the House ensuring access to contraception. That passed 228 to 195. All of 8 Republicans voted yes to using contraception. Meanwhile, 195 Republicans, every single no vote, that was voted no. 195 Republicans in the House, all except for 8, voted against ensuring access to birth control in America in 2022. If there was any doubt about the extent to which these Republicans are openly, brazenly trying to thrust this country into whatever Christo-fascist ethno-state they're trying to build, this is it. I mean, these people are saying, we don't believe that you have the right to have access to birth control in America. That came on the heels of just a couple of days ago. The House ultimately did pass a bill codifying same-sex marriage and interracial marriage that passed by a margin of 267 to 157. All 157 no votes, again, were Republicans. This is where the Republican Party is going. This is where the Supreme Court is going. I mean, for people that say, "Oh, well, the Supreme Court would never do that." First of all, that's what they said about Roe. That we've had 30 years of people saying, "Oh, the Democrats are just being alarmist by claiming that the Supreme Court is going to overturn Roe. It's never going to happen. Democrats are just trying to raise money and scare you." Cut to, that's exactly what they did. The second they have a 6-3 majority, the very first term that they have a 6-3 majority, Roe is overturned. 50 years of precedent is overturned. Meanwhile, all of those people who claim that Roe wouldn't be overturned are now claiming that, "Oh, don't worry, same-sex marriage, nothing's going to happen to same-sex marriage," while they're broadcasting in their channels, during their speeches on Fox News, OAN, Newsmax, these right-wing radio shows. Ted Cruz said it himself on his own Verdict podcast, that the goal now is to mainstream this idea that the Supreme Court was wrong to rule in favor of, to rule the way they did in Obergefell, which was the Supreme Court case legalizing same-sex marriage, as part of that whole block of privacy rights that these conservatives are saying Americans aren't granted by virtue of our Constitution, even though they are. We have a 14th Amendment that gives rights that aren't enumerated in the Constitution, including rights to privacy, including rights to contraception, same-sex marriage, and on and on. Abortion rights. Of course, Republicans, because they are guided by this idea that the United States is their religious playground, is their church, basically, and they want to proselytize all of the people living in it. They've decided that because they don't believe in the idea of same-sex marriage, because some small faction of them doesn't believe in the idea of same-sex marriage, that should be a decree onto everyone else, which is especially ironic coming from the small government party. So yeah, we've been fed for years this idea that Republicans would never, don't want to overstep, and we have to, in fact, we need the Second Amendment because you never know what's going to happen with a government, an overbearing government that oversteps its bounds. Cut to, it's that same party that's saying, we don't want the government to overstep, except when we decree when you should have a baby, even in instances where you are raped, even when we decree who you can marry, even when we can decree what your healthcare decisions are, even when we decree, the whole gamut of this stuff, even when we can decree where and when you can travel. We're going to get to that in a moment. But just this idea that we've been fed, that they've hid behind this veil of small government, only the moment that they have the power to completely throw that by the wayside and start mandating decrees, passing down decrees that are only there because these ideas comport with their religious views, forget about the separation of church and state, is just kind of like a testament to the fact that they've hidden behind this bullshit for the last, my entire lifetime, like decades. And yet the moment that they have the ability to actually, pass down some of these decrees, exercise their power, all that small government bullshit is right out the window, and they start mandating where we can go, who we can marry, what we can do with our bodies. It just kind of goes to show that even these tepid principles that they would hide behind, even the ideas that they would pretend to espouse or just kind of like lightly hide behind, even though they kind of seemed like bullshit on their face, the second that they didn't have to abide by those, the second that they didn't get to, use the Constitution or hide behind that, the second that it becomes convenient for them to try to pass along their religious views onto everyone else, they do it without a second thought. So it's just kind of like the ultimate irony, and it just shows the extent to which they don't actually have any governing principles that they abide by. There's nothing about small government. There's nothing about family values. I mean, the party lined up and is falling over itself to lift up Donald Trump, the guy who had God knows how many mistresses, and he paid for hush money payments and this and that. So states' rights is all bullshit. Family values is all bullshit. Well, I can't even remember any other ideas that it's been so long that they've actually pretended to stand for anything other than just outright authoritarianism that I can't even remember these ideas that they pretend, cutting taxes, even though when they passed their tax cut, it was like the benefits were seen in the 90th percentile by the ultra wealthy, by millionaires and billionaires, and meanwhile they give crumbs to everybody else and expect a parade as a thank you. That was a big tangent. All of that is to say, we've seen these votes now on ensuring access to contraception. That was today. Ensuring codification of same-sex marriage and interracial marriage. That was a few days ago. We had a vote that Democratic Senator Masto Cortez tried to pass by unanimous consent in the Senate that would ensure access to interstate travel. That was blocked by Republican James Lankford. Again, these are people who want to be able, in the instance that abortion is blocked in their state and it's still legal in another state, these are people who simply want to reiterate the idea that as Americans, we have the right to travel freely in the United States of America to have reproductive health care. What the Republicans are saying, yes, you are American, but no, you don't have the right to travel freely within this country. You don't have the right to cross borders from California to into Texas. In the United States, if you are an American, you can't travel across borders freely for reproductive health care. That's what they're trying to criminalize right now. I mean, this is so far past the point of any reasonable freedom. These are the same people crowing about freedom on a daily basis who now say that you don't have the right to get in your car and drive from Texas to California for a healthcare choice. I mean, how do you even enforce something like that? I mean, are we talking state troopers camped out on the side of the road who can pull you over to administer pregnancy tests? Is that what they plan on doing? Do they have doctors that are gonna track your gestational progress? So maybe you have doctors that go to everybody's house by house just to see if you're pregnant on a random day. Maybe if your name is A to E, you get Monday, F to I on Tuesday, and they just come to your house on a bi-weekly basis and administer pregnancy tests. And then if you're not at your house the following week, kind of like a mini house. I mean, honestly, how do they plan on enforcing this kind of thing? That's not to say that they won't. But I mean, when you get into the actual mechanics, the logistics of how they would actually enforce some of what they're trying to do, because they're trying to do it without any care in the world for how they're actually going to enforce it. And you know that the devil is in the details with this kind of stuff, because if they said, yeah, no, we want state troopers camped out on the highways and we'll have little toll roads between states, between red states and blue states, and we'll administer pregnancy tests. I mean, imagine them saying, first of all, this stuff is already aggressively, woefully unpopular. Imagine when they start getting into the specifics, and there's a reason they won't get into the specifics, because it is dark. I mean, it's exactly what I'm saying. The only way to police interstate travel is to quite literally police interstate travel. And so, they won't talk about that stuff. But they're still trying to do it anyway. None of that bothers them. They just want it done, and they will enforce it in the most draconian, anti-American, big government, overreaching. I mean, this is the same party that whines about communism and Marxism as if that's not exactly what they're trying to do. This big overbearing government that's able to do anything. I mean, it's just outright fascism at this point. But in any case, it's ironic too, because a few weeks ago when Dobbs was handed down, when Roe was overturned, Republicans were saying, all right, well, it's a states' rights issue now. That's the ultimate goal. Don't worry, it's not like we're trying to ban abortion nationwide. Cut to, Republicans have introduced what they call the Heartbeat Protection Act, which, you guessed it, is a ban on abortion nationwide. So every time they tell you, okay, we finally got what we want, we're not going to go any further, don't worry, hysterical liberals, they do the exact thing that they warned they would never do. Brazenly, in broad daylight. So now you have these bills that have been introduced. And of course, while we have a Democratic House, obviously Nancy Pelosi would never bring the Heartbeat Protection Act to the floor, but it just kind of underscores the danger that we're facing because we have midterms coming up. It isn't a great environment for Democrats in midterms, but I hope people recognize that if Republicans gain any semblance of a majority in either the House or Senate, these are the bills that are going to come up. And granted, right now, we're good for a couple years, even in the off chance that Republicans were able to take the House and the Senate. We do have Biden as a stopgap who wouldn't allow any of these bills to pass. But, we're looking at 2024, obviously. If Republicans are able to take power, we are getting a preview right now of exactly the legislation that they'd be looking to pass. How do I know? Because they're trying to pass it right now in a Democratic House. If they're trying to do this right now, A, knowing how unpopular it is, and B, knowing that it won't even pass. So this is their messaging. When you introduce bills that aren't going to pass, they're messaging bills. It's basically broadcasting, to your party, hey, if you put us in power, this is what our priority is going to be. So they are telling us, they're previewing for us right now exactly what they would do if they were able to gain power. And so we have bills that come up like the Heartbeat Protection Act. I can guarantee you, as certain as the day is long, that if Republicans take power, we'll have a Heartbeat Protection Act introduced in Congress. We'll have bills banning contraception. We'll have bills banning same-sex marriage, because this is what they do. They first say, it's a states' rights issue. The Supreme Court was wrong to overturn it. And then the Supreme Court goes and they overturn it just like they did with Roe. And they say, great, now it's a states' rights issue. No one's going to touch it anymore. The next day, just like that, as certain as the day is long, they introduce legislation actually going further and banning the very thing that they just claimed was a states' rights issue. It's what just happened with abortion. All this time, for years, we've heard it's a states' rights issue. This Obergefell was wrongly decided. It's not that we don't believe in abortion rights. It's just that we believe it should be up to each state because it's not explicitly enumerated in the Constitution. Even though, again, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution contains rights that aren't enumerated in the Constitution. So these are protections in the 14th Amendment. That's how it's been for 5 decades, half a century. It's only that they're just making it up right now that, in fact, because it's not specifically enumerated, it doesn't count. Thereby negating the entire text of the 14th Amendment. But anyway, so they say that it's just a states' rights issue. The very next thing they do is turn around, introduce legislation banning the very thing they just claimed was a states' rights issue. They will do it for same-sex marriage. They'll do it for interracial. I'm not sure if they'll do it for interracial marriage, only because you have someone like Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court. Because God forbid they do anything that inconveniences them personally. So they may actually allow interracial marriage to stand just because they need to pay a little deference to someone like Clarence Thomas. But everything else, it's not like they have any LGBT members in their ranks. I mean, even you have the log cabin Republicans. This is what I thought was crazy. When the House passed the bill codifying same-sex marriage, again, that vote was 267 to 157. There were, I believe, 47 Republicans who voted in favor. So you have 47 Republicans who voted in favor of same-sex marriage. You have 157 who didn't, so more than 3 times more. Then you have the log cabin Republicans, who, by the way, I believe at the Republican National Committee weren't even given a booth. They were denied a booth just like they've been every year. The Republicans are basically saying, we don't want you. The log cabin Republicans came onto Twitter and celebrated the fact that 47 Republicans voted in favor of same-sex marriage. Hey, what about the other 157? I mean, it's wild the extent to which these people will do gymnastics around the fact to hide the fact that they're part of a party that doesn't think that they should exist and that are trying to legislate them out of existence. I just thought that was talk about groveling. So yeah, better celebrate the 47 Republicans and not the 157 who think that you deserve your own humanity. So just to sum up where the votes have been so far, the votes that we've seen thus far, we had 209 House Republicans voting against abortion rights. We had 205 House Republicans voting against protecting interstate travel for reproductive care. We had 195 Republicans vote today against protecting contraception access. We're talking birth control. condoms. And we had 157 House Republicans vote against marriage equality, protecting same-sex marriage and interracial marriage. That's where the party is. There is no dancing around what that party has become. I mean, it's bad enough already, the fact that we have to have these hearings, because we're in a position where we have to now explain to people the importance of accountability for a guy who tried to incite a coup at the U.S. Capitol, while these people stand in line, fall in line rather. But now, I mean, just the outright Christo-fascist nature of the Republican Party, where they are so quick to strip all of these rights that have been enjoyed for 50 years. This is the first time in American history that rights are being taken away from people. The first time in American history. This is unprecedented. That's what these people are running on. That's what they're coming out before the election and saying. This is the kind of stuff that you keep quiet and you try to do in January after an election just passed, and you got a long runway. You got 2 years of just carte blanche before you're even, before there's any accountability at the polls. That's what you do that's a January or February move. These people are coming out a few months before an election. They are so sure. They are so sure of their stance. They're so sure of like these anti-democratic processes that they've put in place working for them. And that's the scary part too, is that they put in place a lot of these anti-democratic measures. They've passed bills like SB 202 in Georgia. Obviously, they've gerrymandered states to within an inch of their lives. Florida ended up being a major redistricting weapon thanks to someone like Ron DeSantis for these Republicans, because Florida did have an amendment that blocked them from actually being able to institute unfair maps, but they have a far-right Supreme Court, state Supreme Court, that just upheld these Republican maps anyway because it doesn't matter. These Republican operatives, they're not bound by the same, they're not playing the same game. They're not participating in democracy. So you can pass these provisions and then they just decide that they don't count, and that's it. And there's no recourse, because this whole thing, this whole experiment is predicated on the idea that everybody agrees that we are in a democracy. If people don't follow the laws as they're written, they're not worth the paper that they're written on. And so when you have these Republicans who no longer feel bound to follow the laws as they're written because their goal is no longer to participate in a democracy, their goal is to consolidate power for themselves, then we can pass these laws, we can pass good governance laws, we can pass anti-gerrymandering laws. If they don't follow them up to the highest ranks, which is like the Florida Supreme Court, the Florida governor, then you're not really operating in a democracy anymore. Because if they're not following the laws, not playing the same game as you, then that's basically how democracy dies. So they're so certain, the Republican Party is so certain of these anti-democratic institutions that have been put in place, and the way that they've purged their party of anybody who's willing to speak out. I mean, we've seen in these hearings, there was one really striking thing. When we had the January 6th committee hearing, I believe it was dead smack in the middle, and it was the one with Lady Ruby and Shay Moss, and she claimed that of every single election worker that was working at the site that she was working at, that Shay Moss was working at, none of them are current election workers anymore. This is the way that they purge good people from government, because of the extent to which they've used violence as a political tool, because of the extent to which they've doxed these people, humiliated them, made their lives a living hell, broken into their houses, protested them, like I said, released all their information on the internet. These good people will go away, and then you have the Steve Bannons of the party who will fill that void with people whose only objective is to overturn the election results in the Republicans' favor. And so that's how this entire process works. But I think, it's especially telling that that's what they're trying to do here. They're so sure of the steps that they've taken since 2020. And yes, this coup attempt was a disaster, but a lot of the people who just a handful of people who were put in place to actually stop this have been purged from the party, or don't want any of this shit. And I get it. I completely get it. And I wish that wasn't the case. Like, I wish I could tell these people to stand strong and stay in there. And the reason that they are there is the reason that democracy will continue to function, but I understand that they wouldn't. I mean, look, my house isn't getting broken into. I have to take crazy steps to protect my own privacy. These people aren't prepared for that. These people have their names listed in phone books. They have their addresses out there. They don't know how to do, cybersecurity protections or anything like that. So I understand, and I wish that wasn't the case, that when we have good elections workers who are just there to do their civic duty and keep this machine humming along, that, instead we have, those people are going to be purged. Those people are going to leave because they're fearing for their own safety, or they just don't want to deal with this shit. And they're going to be replaced by these Republicans and, people whose only objective here is to ensure that Donald Trump and the rest of his lackeys actually come out on top, regardless of the election results. So all of that is to say that these people are so sure of the steps they've put in place between gerrymanders, between voter suppression efforts, between voter integrity laws that have been passed in states like Georgia, that they don't even fear recourse here. And they say, like, okay, we're going to advocate for overturning Roe and banning abortion, even though Roe is supported by 70% of Americans, which is a crazy high statistic in this country. The way that this country is polarized, most issues have devolved into 50-50 at this point. You can pretty much, whatever the issue is, I mean you could have curing cancer, and in this country right now at this point in time, it could be, you could have people who are anti-cancer, and then the people who are freedom for cancer. Cancer should have rights too. And yet, we have 70% of Americans who support Roe as it stood. And for these Republicans to come out vocally in opposition to something like that, and not just that, not just Roe, because all Roe did was ensure federal access to a safe and legal abortion. Now these people are going even farther, banning interstate travel. I guarantee if you polled interstate travel in the United States of America, you'd have 80 to 90% support. I mean, you always have these this random tiny faction of people who are like, yeah, no, we shouldn't be able to travel either, just whatever it takes. But you're looking at issues that poll 10 to 20% in Republicans' favor, and those are the issues that they are overtly, outwardly, proudly broadcasting as their platform before midterms. That's how sure of the anti-democratic institutions that they put in place. So I guess I should say at this point, if even if you are a Republican, look at this stuff and recognize that this is exactly what's on the ballot. I know Republicans would love to make this next election about nothing other than inflation, which is worldwide, and gas prices, which are worldwide and coming down. They would love to make this election about nothing more than that. But this is the stuff that's going to impact our lives for the rest of our lives. I guarantee you, gas prices will come down. And we won't be thinking about it in 6 months, but if you're not able to travel interstate, across state lines, if you're not able to make your own healthcare decisions, if you're not able to marry same-sex partners, you think that that's not going to have a massive impact, not only on your lives as they are right now, but if Republicans are elected back into office on this platform, imagine what that's going to tell them. Imagine the validation that that's going to give them moving forward. If you think this is bad, we always think it's rock bottom. It never is. Republicans aren't even in power right now. And they found a way, through their lackeys on the Supreme Court, through their political operatives on the Supreme Court, to continue stripping people, Americans, of their rights that they've enjoyed for half a century, without even being in power. Imagine when they are in power. Imagine the legislation they're going to pass. And this is just a taste of it. This is just the stuff that they see that they're willing to broadcast before the election. This is and that's already wildly unpopular. Blocking interstate travel, blocking abortion, blocking the codification of same-sex marriage and interracial marriage, blocking contraception access, already wildly unpopular. This is stuff that polls 10 to 20% support. Imagine what they're going to do when they don't have an election, when they're not trying to get votes from people. My God, imagine the extent that they're going to go to. So with that said, I mean, if you're looking at this stuff, if you have family members, friends, neighbors, anybody who didn't vote in the last election, who doesn't plan on voting in this election, who considers themselves in the middle, and God knows I have those friends, who considers themselves not politically active, who maybe just turned 18 or 19 or 20, maybe somebody who isn't happy with Biden, isn't happy with this White House, thinks that the Democratic response to this stuff has been feckless, and God knows I've had my issues with the lack of fight in this party, and I'll talk about that in a few moments. This is not a referendum on that. This right here is our last chance to protect these rights that are on the chopping block right now. The only way this stops, I can guarantee you, the only way this stops, the only way Republicans see a change in what they're doing is if they suffer a massive repudiation at the ballot box and say, oh shit, what we're doing is actually losing us power. We have to change direction. That's it. If they win this election, if they win any semblance of power in this election, if they're able to, split half the House seats with Democrats, they'll take that as a win. If they're able to keep Democrats' majority at 50 or 51, just enough so that we're still not able to overcome the filibuster, overcome Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema on the filibuster, they'll take that as a win. And they will go full steam ahead with these exact same pieces of legislation. This is it. This is the fight right here, and it's happening this November. So if you have any of these people in your lives who aren't activated, who didn't vote last time, who aren't, enthused enough to vote this time, this is not a referendum on Joe Biden. This election is not a referendum on Joe Biden. This is our last chance to protect these rights. That's it. I don't know how else. I don't know how else to say it. So if you have people, I would just say find a few people in your circle that you can help register to vote and that you can make part of your plan. I had a few people in this last election. If you can find a few people who didn't, just for example, in Wisconsin, Joe Biden won the state of Wisconsin by a margin of 3 votes per precinct. That's it. If they had flipped 3 votes per precinct, Joe Biden would have lost the state of Wisconsin. So if you don't think that just finding 1 or 2 or 3 people can have a massive difference, if every single person in every single precinct, or just one person in each precinct in a state was able to flip 3 people, that state would have been, it would have been a whole different landscape in 2020. So that's the impact that you can have just by virtue of activating a few people, making a few people your responsibility. Okay, just to give an update, since I've been going off about abortion rights for about 30 minutes now, we are 35 minutes away from this hearing beginning. This will be the last January 6th committee hearing. We've had 7 before this one. This will be the 8th and final one of this block. We should still expect to see more January 6th committee hearings, either when new information surfaces, which was the case with Cassidy Hutchinson. Obviously, they called that within 24 hours. They called an emergency hearing because she had so much information to divulge, and it was important that she did. So we can expect to see more of those when new information comes out, and we can expect to see another tranche of January 6th committee hearings when the committee issues its final report. So this is the last one for now. I anticipate that we'll probably get maybe the rest of the summer off, but who knows? Things change every single day, so we'll see what happens. But in the meantime, we have about 35 minutes until that begins. I would ask anybody who's watching right now, if they're enjoying this coverage, please subscribe to my channel. That is the best way to support my work. You don't have to join. You don't have to spend any money. Just a simple subscribe is the single best way to support what I do. I have my daily breaking news videos. So if you have about 5 minutes a day, or if you watch on double speed like I do, 2 to 3 minutes a day, just to get caught up on what usually is what I find is the most viral video of the day in terms of what happened. Maybe some days there'll be 2 videos. I also have an interview series, and for people watching right now, I haven't announced this at all, but my guest this upcoming week, the interview will be released on Sunday. I spoke to Vice President Kamala Harris. So in the last few months, I spoke with President Biden and the Vice President, and that'll be released on Sunday. This is the first I'm letting anybody know about it. I haven't tweeted about it. I haven't released it to anyone, and I'm pretty sure that none of my friends and maybe just 3 of my family members know that I interviewed the vice president. So that interview is coming out on Sunday. So if you want to check that interview out as soon as it's available, definitely subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so you can be alerted when I do post. So, and it wasn't in person, by the way. It was not. It was remote, which is good because obviously Biden came down with COVID today, and it was just reported about an hour ago that Kamala Harris was a close contact of Biden. So really got away with, snuck under the radar with that one. This live stream has also turned into a commercial for coconut water. That one's a freebie. If the coconut water people are watching, this one's a freebie, but definitely a great product placement opportunity for coconut water here. I don't know if I could have found a bigger bottle of coconut water than a full liter. I'm gonna go for a gallon of coconut water at the next one. Okay, just a few pieces of other news. A few days ago, Betsy DeVos called for abolishing the Department of Education. That was a comment that she made at a Florida event where they're basically, plotting a takeover of local school boards across the country. That's what Republicans are trying to do. In a number of these races, these far-right Republicans who don't think that, public schools should exist, who don't think education should exist, are running in these elections, and oftentimes they're losing. But this is the trajectory of the Republican Party. They're trying to destroy public education as we know it, and I think it's a long-term strategy in the sense that this idea of critical race theory was their big thing. Basically, what they want to do is refrain from any teaching of our own history that doesn't kind of comport with their own political and religious views. And so if you teach that the Civil War was about slavery, for example, then that teaches you that was wrong, and it teaches you what our nation's history was founded upon and how we can allow that history to inform how we move forward and right past wrongs and on and on. If they can block the teaching of that kind of history, or just blanket call it critical race theory and say that in fact, no, the Civil War wasn't about slavery, it was about states' rights or the economy, even though it's states' rights to do what and the economics of what. So that's what they're trying to do. This is a long-term strategy to try to brainwash any kids going through the educational process that about what our nation's history was predicated on, what our nation's history was founded on. They're trying to ban history, they're trying to ban books, they're trying to ban speech by certain students. Now you have someone like Betsy DeVos, who's in charge of the Department of Education under Trump, who's just outright admitting it, calling for the abolition of the Department of Education. So that kind of is a testament to the fact that a lot of what Republicans would say quietly before, they're saying openly now. There is no position that's too depraved for them to take. Again, we're talking nationwide abortion bans. We're talking about blocking the ability for Americans to travel between states. We're talking about blocking the ability for same-sex couples to get married. We're talking about blocking the ability for Americans to have the right to have contraception. And now they're trying to call for the abolition of public education, basically, because they want to be able to, to mold students into whatever they think is going to be the most politically advantageous for them by virtue of what they learn. That's Betsy DeVos's comments. Only the best people, of course. Next, something I thought was important is, I believe this was today, a judge sentenced one of the January 6th defendants, Don Bancroft, to 2 months in prison. The judge says that he was especially troubled by Bancroft's selfie video in which she said, quote, "We were looking for Nancy to shoot her in the frickin' brain." And then Bancroft obviously told the judge that the video was foolish, which is the most generous way to describe a desire to assassinate the Speaker of the House. I would probably agree that was a foolish thing to do. I think at a bare minimum, we're all probably on the same page that it was probably a foolish thing to do, to call for the assassination of the Speaker of the House. Yeah, I think we're all on the same page with that one. So obviously the ongoing trial is still occurring with Steve Bannon, who flouted his congressional subpoena, and we'll see how that plays out. I believe they just finished their jury selection, so they have 22 jurors in that trial. But moving in the right direction. But more broadly, I do want to talk about this idea of Merrick Garland and the DOJ. And there was a clip a few days ago on Maddow, and Maddow had done a story and I covered it as well on my YouTube channel, where she explained how Merrick Garland left in place Bill Barr's DOJ memo, his guidance of the DOJ that was new as of February 2020, stating that investigating any candidates for office needs sign-off at the highest levels of the DOJ, meaning the Attorney General himself, and that is to avoid the appearance of a conflict of the DOJ trying to interfere with some partisan political agenda. Now, the reason that Bill Barr had put this memo in place is obviously so that the DOJ couldn't open any investigation into Donald Trump. He was just protecting Donald Trump, and he was doing it under the guise of like, oh yeah, we have to maintain the integrity of the DOJ. That's not what he was trying to do. He wasn't trying to maintain the integrity of the DOJ. He was trying to protect Donald Trump by preventing any members of the DOJ from opening any investigation into Donald Trump without his express sign-off, which he wouldn't give. That's why Bill Barr put that in place. It was to protect a criminal president. That was the goal of that. For some reason, Merrick Garland's decided that was with merit, and on its face, it's fine. Like if you have an attorney general who is committed to following the law, then it's not a big deal. And these kind of things have been reiterated in past administrations. But more broad, the issue that I want to talk about is just this idea of the steps that he's taken to avoid the appearance of a conflict. And this is kind of colored the entirety of Merrick Garland's tenure, is that we haven't seen any action at the top for these people who've incited the insurrection on January 6th. It's been 18 months. In the short time that the January 6th committee has been together, they've obviously done 1,000 interviews. They have hundreds of thousands of documents that they've looked over. Every indication that we get from reporting is that the DOJ is 100 steps behind them, and like the way that the media at least paints this picture is that they're just begging for all of these documents and these depositions and testimonies materials so that they can incorporate them into their own investigations. But it's been a year and a half and we haven't seen movement for any of these big fish, and there is explosive facts that just kind of make it clear beyond any reasonable doubt the extent to which Donald Trump knowingly incited this insurrection, even tried to march alongside armed insurrectionists to the Capitol, but was stopped by Secret Service agents and aides who just wouldn't let him go to the Capitol because they said, I believe, I can't remember who exactly it was that said it, but said we would be breaking a ton of laws, and so they wouldn't under any circumstances allow him to go to the Capitol alongside these insurrectionists. But even despite all of this, every indication that we get publicly from the DOJ and Merrick Garland is that they are so worried about not doing anything that would give the impression of being political. But if you're going to put the notion of the optics of neutrality above actual justice, then you're undermining your whole goal. Here's the thing. If you indict a former president, that is a political figure. It is inherently political. That's it. Get over it. It's going to be political regardless. So either you just do your job and defend the law and uphold the Constitution, or you sit there and rock back and forth and worry about the optics of what you're doing and worry about how the other side is going to perceive it. Here's the thing. They're going to perceive it as political regardless. They all think it's political. Nobody's saying, oh, well, I'm holding my breath to see how this thing pans out. If you indict Donald Trump, people are going to think it's political. That's it. It's baked into the cake. So at this point, knowing that there's no changing their minds, just do what's right. That's the only thing that matters right now. Just do what's right. And so, this is what I can't get over, is that is that even talking about this stuff, even just bringing up this idea of like, don't want to have optics of being a partisan institution, just bringing that into the conversation does that job anyway. It's what we're talking about now anyway, instead of just talking about holding Trump accountable for what he did. That should be the first, second, and third priority. There should be nothing else beyond this. Doesn't matter who Donald Trump is. You either have people who are above the law in this country or not. And if you don't have people who are above the law, it does not matter whether they're on the right or left, whether they were a former president or a current president. If you're not above the law, they should be held accountable. So just move that prosecution forward. We already know, in these last 7 hearings, we found out that the extent to which Donald Trump knew what he was doing was illegal, knew the extent to which he was defrauding the American people. He can claim that there was fraud in the election. We have testimony, we have deposition from Alex Cannon, Hirschman, Bill Barr, even Ivanka Trump, saying that they knew that there was no fraud in this election. And they told Donald Trump that there was no fraud in the election. What did he do? He came out and told his supporters that there was fraud in the election. Why? Because he knowingly tried to defraud those people so that he can convince them to help him block certification of the election results. That's it. He was just trying to commit a felony and lying to his supporters to help him do that. They all said themselves they were there because they were summoned there by him. That guy in the last committee hearing said it himself. He said, had Donald Trump told me to go home sooner, I'd have turned around and gone home. They were summoned by this guy. They were deceived by him. He knew the truth. He knew there was no fraud in that election, and he knew there was no path to victory. But it didn't stop him. He did it anyway. That's what these committee hearings have been all about. The extent to which every single excuse they gave, from this idea that there was fraud in the election, which was thrown out in over 65 court cases, this idea that that they had legal standing for Mike Pence to unilaterally decide, whether or not he could accept the electoral slates, the electoral counts that were handed in by these states. That's with the John Eastman memo. The John Eastman memo that even John Eastman himself said wouldn't pass muster with the Supreme Court. He said we could probably get one vote on the Supreme Court, which is obviously an allusion to Clarence Thomas. And it's bad when you say, well, we could get one. We could get one person who's going to outright let us overthrow democracy. That's just an aside. But every single step Donald Trump took was to knowingly defraud the American people. And so you have all of this proof. You have this entire case laid out by the January 6th committee for the DOJ. And yet, we're kind of still sitting here with our thumbs up our asses. And look, I say that knowing full well that Merrick Garland may right now be preparing an indictment for Donald Trump, may be preparing to prosecute Donald Trump. And in his defense, they've prosecuted hundreds of lower level defendants and participants in the January 6th committee, in the January 6th insurrection. But the fact that we are a year and a half away and inching ever closer to yet another election is showing the unacceptably slow pace that that the DOJ investigation is moving in, and I think it's because the DOJ is so worried about not seeming political, is so worried about how people who already don't trust them, who will never trust them regardless of what they do, what those people think, instead of just going, full bore and following the law and upholding the Constitution, that it's kind of putting us in a place where we're extremely vulnerable. Because here's the thing. The next time that this happens, it'll be not just the fault of the people who do it, not just the fault of someone like Donald Trump. It'll be also the fault of the agency that was tasked to uphold the law, defend the law, and hold those people accountable and didn't. And that's the difference. The first time, what does it say? Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. I think that's the quote. I think I just pulled a George W. Bush. Anyway, I don't know that quote. I've done this like 4 times on my live streams where I accidentally start to say this quote. In any case, the first time it'll have been Donald Trump's fault. The second time, Merrick Garland and the DOJ will be partially to blame as well. Because if those are the people tasked with enforcing the law and they don't do it, then you really can't blame people. You really can't blame a bank robber who's robbed 6 banks so far, and it's been a year and a half, Everybody knows who the bank robber was. The bank robber knows he did it, basically admitted that he did it. All of his friends admitted that he did it. All the cops know that he did it, and nobody's bothered to charge the guy. Do you think he's gonna rob another bank? Probably. I would. If there's no accountability for him, why not? It's free money. It's exactly what's happening right here. Who would you be more angry at? The bank robber who just robbed 6 banks and is looking toward the 7th, standing outside the 7th bank in broad daylight? Would you be more angry at him at that point, or would you be more angry at the police who are doing nothing? I know who I would be more angry at that point. So that's my beef with this. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with the DOJ. Again, you know, I say all of this with the caveat that I have no idea what's happening at the DOJ, and I hope they're moving as quickly as I hope they are moving. And I hope they're taking all the information that's been compiled by the January 6th committee, because they have created an airtight case for those people over there. But we'll see. What I don't want to hear, though, the last thing I want to hear is this idea that the optics of neutrality are somehow more important than justice. I just could not care less about how the agency is perceived for doing its job. I just don't care about that, and they shouldn't either. It doesn't matter if half the country hates you. Here's the thing: they're gonna hate you anyway. They're either gonna hate you or they're not. This is a political figure. You have half the country who supports the guy, maybe a little less. They're gonna think that it's political regardless. And if they don't indict him, then you have the left that's going to think that politics pervaded this thing anyway. It's already political is what I'm trying to say. It's already a done deal. Like I said, baked into the cake. So at this point, you either do what's right or you just defer to politics, and then you become the very thing that you were trying to push back against. That's it. Okay, for people just tuning in, we are 15 minutes away from the final January 6th committee hearing starting. This is the second primetime hearing after the first one. I believe the first hearing was primetime, and this will be the other primetime hearing. Obviously, the first one drew a massive audience, and I expect this one to draw. They've all been drawing massive audiences, by the way. I believe even the daytime hearings. I live streamed one that was at 7 o'clock in the morning Pacific time. That drew millions upon millions upon millions. I believe that one had more people watching than the World Series. So this one will most likely have the biggest audience yet. So I expect a lot of people to be tuning in for this one. We're going to be hearing. We're going to have a focus on this one on what Donald Trump was doing in those. I believe it was 187 minutes during the actual insurrection itself. I know that Republicans have used a lot of this time to claim that. It was Nancy Pelosi's fault for not calling in the National Guard, which is obviously bullshit. Nancy Pelosi doesn't have jurisdiction above Donald Trump. So, we're going to hear a lot about that today, but it definitely promises to be a pretty explosive hearing, just like all the others have. I would also take this time to ask if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, if you enjoy this pre-show, or if you've come across any of my videos and haven't yet subscribed, please subscribe to this channel, and subscribe to other progressive media channels as well. I think it's really important. Like, we have a job here as more and more people continue to get their news from YouTube, which ostensibly you guys do just because you're watching it. I don't have cable. This is how I get my news. The more progressive, the stronger the progressive media ecosystem is, the more likely it'll be that when more people come on to get their news, that they'll be diverted to the left as opposed to the right. When I first came onto YouTube a few years ago, all of my content, I was immediately put into the right-wing algorithm. In fact, I remember one of the first outlets that I was fed news from was Breitbart. And at that point, this was before Trump was elected, but I didn't know what Breitbart was. I didn't know if it was right or left, but I was like, oh, I think that this is what news is. Eventually, I realized what an absolute crock of shit Breitbart ultimately was. But people who are like tuning in, who aren't like super attuned to this stuff, won't know that Breitbart is a right-wing rag. And so, as more and more people continue to move onto YouTube, I think it's like especially important that we, everybody here does their part to bolster the progressive media ecosystem. So I would ask if you could please follow my channel, but also follow other progressive commentators and give engagement to their channels. I'm talking Crooked Media. My friend Abdul El Sayed is another great one. You know, Kyle Kalinske, the Young Turks, David Pakman, Midas Touch, Rational National. Throw them in the chat because I'm gonna start forgetting these, and I don't want to forget anyone. But if you come across these people on YouTube, give them a follow and build up their followings, and make sure that when more people come on, that the videos that they're fed in their algorithms are left of center videos as opposed to right of center videos, because the people who are, you know, coming onto YouTube for the first time, who are 18 years old, 17 years old, and just trying to get into politics for the first time, if they're fed into that right-wing rabbit hole, it is a difficult place for them to get out of. And if you want any, you know, indication of how dangerous the right-wing rabbit hole could be, I mean, I think that isn't lost on anyone as these shootings have continued. Just want to read a few more. Beau of the Fifth Column, Farron Cousins, Hassan Piker, Vosh, Good Liars, Sam Cedar, Dollamore, my friend Glenn Kirshner, that's Glenn with 2 N's, Majority Report, Ring of Fire, Mary Trump is a great one. She's wonderful. Tom Hartman, somebody wrote. So, Texas Paul. So yeah, there's a ton. I think that I've gotten just about all of them. Anna Kasparian, obviously with the Young Turks, Hal Sparks. So yeah, you know, support progressive media. There's a fight for this turf. That's quite literally why I do what I do. That is the fight right now. That's where, you know, where people are getting their news more and more, and it is really important that this is where this is where we get people to get filtered into the left-wing channels as opposed to the right-wing channels. Do you feel guilted into subscribing to my channel yet? I promise that was not the long game to get you to subscribe to my channel with a whole dose of guilt. The future of the Republic is at stake. The only way to save it is to follow progressive media channels on YouTube. Okay, we have about 12 minutes to go. I do want to touch on this idea of gas prices really quick, because I know it's an important issue, and I know there's a lot of disinformation surrounding that, and I had a note to myself to talk about $5 gas. First of all, we are 36 straight days into declining gas prices, which I think is important to note. Obviously, this administration has been releasing 1 million barrels a day from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That's an important element of this. But a lot of people are saying, okay, it's Biden's fault that we have $5 gas in the first place. I want to talk about some really, really, really simple reasons about why there is $5 gas. So, first of all, during the pandemic, demand for gas pretty much went down to nothing. So a bunch of oil refineries shut down. Oil refineries were shutting down anyway because as we move toward a transition to renewables, way too slowly, mind you, but as we move toward this transition to renewables, you'd have oil refineries shutting down slowly. But during this pandemic, because demand cratered, a bunch of oil refineries shut down in one fell swoop. Now, they won't reopen because A, these oil companies are making too much money right now, and B, it wouldn't make sense to reopen these oil refineries when the world is moving toward renewables anyway. They would have normally closed slower, like I mentioned, but the pandemic kind of accelerated those closings. So we have that there are fewer oil refineries that are working right now. We have B, the fact that demand surged, and pretty much when the whole world opened up, everybody got right back into it, was traveling a ton. There's a ton of, I believe that we're above pre-pandemic levels for air travel. So there's that. There's way lower supply because these refineries shut down. There's way higher demand because we're back to, people have been cooped up for a couple years. There's also the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine. And in response to that, people saw Russia's invasion of Ukraine and decided, I don't want to fund Russia's genocidal war against the Ukrainians. We should ban Russian oil. And by the way, that was a position that Republicans also advocated for. Everybody was advocating for banning Russian oil. When you ban Russian oil, who has 8% of the global oil supply, what happens? there is less supply in the world, and because oil is oil is priced on a global market, less supply means higher prices. So now we're paying higher prices because there is a smaller supply by virtue of having banned Russian oil. So that's another reason why oil prices went up. And finally, there is the fact that we didn't transition renewables. Now, hang on real quick. I'm gonna the feed for the January 6th committee hearing is beginning. So the last thing is that we never bothered to transition to renewables. None of this would have been an issue had we transitioned renewables 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or pushed for this transition to happen sooner. We basically didn't. We have half of our government, an entire political party that is so entrenched with fossil fuel companies that we're pretty much fully reliant, especially in these red areas, on fossil fuels still. The exception is a place like California, for example, where just a few days ago, I believe the first time was in May of this year, so a couple months ago, California ran on 100% renewable energy for the first time. So you have these blue states where there are people who aren't completely in bed with the fossil fuel industry, but other than that, we haven't done transition renewables, and so we are fully reliant on fossil fuels. And so when we have this product with inelastic demands like the price of oil, we're completely, we're held hostage by those price increases. So all of those reasons together is why there is $5 gallons of gas. Again, those prices are going down right now. But I just think like the irony of all of these people, by the way, who blame Joe Biden when gas prices went up are the same ones who refuse to give him any credit now. Now the gas prices are going back down. Joe Biden had nothing to do with them going up, and he had nothing to do with them going down. The president has limited tools that he can use, including releasing barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which he did. He can also try to pressure OPEC into increasing their supply. I believe that he got Saudi Arabia to bump up their oil output by another 1 million barrels a day or something. I'm not sure what that number was. But in any case, limited tools that the president can use. That's why there's $5 gas. For anybody trying to gaslight you into thinking that the president is unilaterally responsible for changing those prices on gas stations, just doesn't know what they're talking about. There are a number of factors that came into play with all of this stuff, and that's where we're at right now. All right, let me turn on this audio feed here. For people just tuning in, we are about 7 minutes away from this committee hearing starting. Again, in previous January 6th committee hearings, we've heard from the vice president's general counsel. We heard about this whole idea that debunking John Eastman's memo that the vice president has the ability to unilaterally block the electoral votes that are put forward. We heard about Trump's attempts to influence state legislators. We heard about Trump's efforts to summon a violent mob. We knew the fact that he knew that they were armed. He tried to get them to come through the mags anyway, to eliminate the mags so that these people who were armed could come through. We found out that Donald Trump tried himself to personally march with these insurrectionists to the Capitol and basically physically lead the insurrection, but was stopped by people who realized the extent to which that would have been so aggressively illegal that they wanted at least some tiny modicum of deniability, and that's what they got by virtue of forcing him not to go to the Capitol. We also heard from a number of senior Trump administration and Trump campaign officials like Hirschman, like Alex Cannon, like Bill Barr, like even Ivanka Trump, all of whom came out and admitted that they knew that there was no fraud in this election. They talked to statisticians, they talked to the guy who ran Fox News's election coverage department, who's since been ousted for having committed the crime of correctly calling the election in, I believe, Arizona for Joe Biden. So they spoke to all these people who came out during these depositions and were willing to tell the truth because they had no choice. That they told Donald Trump that there was no fraud in this election. What did he do? He came out numerous times and explained the extent to which there was fraud in this election. They had their avenues to prove fraud in the last election. They brought over 60 court cases forward, and in none of those court cases, A, did they prove any fraud, and B, did they even win? They had one court win, changing a cure deadline in Pennsylvania from 9 to 6 days, which had no impact on the outcome of the race. That's it. So, these people will come out in public, they'll come out on TV and say over and over and over again how there was fraud in the last election, and at no point were they able to prove it. And more damning, behind the scenes, they actually knew the truth. So it just showed the extent to which these people, their only goal here was to lie to their own supporters, to lie to the very people who entrusted them with telling them the truth. So they claimed over and over that there was fraud in the election, even though that they knew that there wasn't. Trump himself knew there wasn't any fraud. He knew there was no path to victory. He decided to take that information, perpetuate the big lie anyway, and ultimately summon a mob of violent people to the Capitol. He knew that there was people who were going to be there. They knew the extent to which the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers were there. They had, I believe it was the last hearing or the second to last hearing, where the spokesperson for, I believe, the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, came forward and he was giving his testimony. Even Cassidy Hutchinson overheard a conversation in the Oval Office where they were explaining the extent to which there would be violence at this thing. And on that day, they knew that there was weapons. They knew these insurrectionists they were sitting in trees with AR-15s and pistols. Donald Trump didn't care. I believe the quote that he used was, "They're not here to hurt me." So they knew that they were there to hurt somebody. I mean, ostensibly, that's why you bring a weapon. But so long as it wasn't to hurt him, he was totally fine with it. But the damning part was he had corrupt intent. He had criminal intent. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew the goal was to lie to these people to get him to do his political bidding that he knew was based on false pretenses. He knew that that there was no fraud in this election. He knew there was no path to victory in this election. He knew he couldn't win this election. He knew that he had legal theories that wouldn't pass muster in the Supreme Court. All of that didn't matter. His only goal here was to lie to his own supporters, to get them to do his bidding, block certification of the election results, defraud those people, and install himself the president in an election that he lost. That was his only goal. Again, like Merrick Garland, it doesn't get much clearer than that. So I hope that, in this hearing we hear a little bit more about what Donald Trump himself was doing. We've had these hearings focused on the vice president, the DOJ, the militia groups, his family members, Mark Meadows' aide, Cassidy Hutchinson, Bill Barr. So now I believe that we're going to hear a little bit about Donald Trump himself in this hearing. Yeah, so that's exactly what this one's going to be. This is going to explain what Donald Trump did for those 187 minutes during the actual attack itself. Obviously, ending with Trump's Twitter video where he basically expressed his admiration for the people who just stormed the Capitol looking to assassinate the Vice President and the Speaker of the House, and reluctantly, begrudgingly told them to go home once he realized that the insurrection wasn't going the way that he had planned for it to go, or didn't end in the massive success that he had hoped that it would end in. So we are seconds away from this hearing beginning now. I would ask, while I've got you, before the January 6th committee filters in, one last shameless plug. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel and you enjoyed the pre-show coverage and you want to hear breaking news coverage, I usually do one 5-minute video a day, really light lift, and you want to see my interviews, just subscribe to this channel. Again, I announced this earlier today. This is the only place that I've announced this, but this week, being released on Sunday, will be my new interview. I interviewed the Vice President Kamala Harris this week, so if you want to check out my interview with Kamala Harris, definitely hit the subscribe button, and you can hit the notification bell as well. This way, you'll be notified when I release new videos. So that'll be released on Sunday morning. So definitely check that out. That was an interview that I've been trying to get for a long time. So this year interviewed both Biden and Harris. So definitely check those out if you get a chance. Okay, let's give you a better view of the people you came to see. It is now 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Pacific. The final hearing, primetime hearing, is going to start any second now. pull up a chair, get comfortable. And we are moments away. Okay. And the January 6th committee is coming in. Thank you for everybody who watched the pre-show. I appreciate it. I hope it was informative. And let's do this. Looking forward to this one. Okay. Wow. Let's go over a number of things that I think were especially important. First of all, what we just heard, just have to say, not for nothing, but of course, Josh Hawley fled from the same exact mob that he helped incite. These guys are absolute cowards. First of all, he helped incite that mob with his raised fist from behind the protection of barriers and police presence. And then when those very same people came into the building, scurried away like a rat. Which I think is just so telling about this entire situation. So weird how he wasn't so quick to join those same people who he was just raising his fist in solidarity with. Where was the solidarity? Well, he was scurrying away. Absolute cowards, these people are. Absolute cowards. A few quotes that I think were especially impactful here. You had that anonymous White House security official say, quote, "There were calls to say goodbye to family members and so forth. The VP detail thought this was going to get very ugly. These people thought they were going to get killed." That is what Donald Trump unleashed on these people, on these innocent. And by the way, just like a quick note on these people for whom this was the final straw and who resigned that day. Where were you for the months leading up to this while Donald Trump was spouting the exact same big lie that led to this in the first place? That was all perfectly acceptable, but those people actually showing up in response to what Trump was doing, that was the final straw. So all of the lies being peppered upon these people, all of the obfuscations and outright denials of reality and attempts to subvert the election results and bringing in state legislature officials and pushing Pence to unilaterally overturn the election results, and all of that stuff was completely fine. But it was only when the negative consequences that were manifested by Trump's lies were visible to everybody in the country, that's when it was just unacceptable after that. Which is just you knew what this was doing. The rest of us were sounding the alarms for weeks and months. Trump already had said that he wouldn't accept the election results unless he won. That's it. That's the only instance where he would accept the election results. Otherwise, he said there was fraud. So when he was setting up that effort to overturn the election months prior, before the first vote was even cast, that was all fine by these people who suddenly found their patriotism, found the line that couldn't be crossed. Only when everybody else could see the consequences of Trump's actions. Give me a break. Give me a break. You knew exactly what his rhetoric was gonna do. We all did. It wasn't a secret. And if we knew it out here, just watching on TV and looking at his tweets and reading his statements, then of course these people in the White House had to know. Unless they are that dense, unless they're that blinded by whatever shield Trump put, whatever. These people were clearly well aware of what his words were doing and the damage they were doing. So for them to only find that line once everybody else saw the damage that he had caused, give me a break. Give me a break. These people aren't heroes. for them to leave at the 11th hour. Come on now. Also thought it was telling that Pat Cipollone testified that it would have been possible for Trump to have given a statement during the more than 2 hours during which he did nothing as the insurrection was going on. Also, we had a witness testify that it would have taken Trump only a few seconds to immediately be able to make a statement. And I think that's damning because it was beyond clear, not just from this hearing, but prior hearings, that the only people that these insurrectionists would take orders from was Trump. He was the reason that they were there. They showed up because he summoned them there with his words. And we heard, I believe it was the very last hearing where that one guy had said, had Trump come sooner and made his statement sooner, I'd have left sooner. He was the only person that they were listening to. And so by virtue of doing nothing for those 187 minutes in between the end of his speech at the Ellipse and his final statement where he said, go home, probably because he had so much legal liability at this point that he had no choice basically but to do it if he wanted to even try to stay out of prison or stay out of the DOJ's crosshairs. But he was the only person, Donald Trump was the only person that these people would listen to, and he made the conscious decision to do nothing. That is tacit permission for these people at the Capitol to keep going, to keep searching for Mike Pence so that they could kill him, to keep searching for Nancy Pelosi so they could kill her. They all knew that the only person that they would respond to, all of Trump's campaign officials, administration officials, they all knew that the only person these insurrectionists would listen to was Donald Trump. They told him numerous times, even Fox News hosts, Laura Ingraham, Hannity, all begging Mark Meadows through those text messages that were released months and months and months ago. All of them begging him to make a statement. Why? Because they knew that Donald Trump was the only person these people would listen to. And by the way, those people then went right on Fox News and pretended like it was Antifa, like it was the FBI, like it was anybody but these Trump supporters. So they were claiming publicly that we don't really think these are Trump supporters. We think this might be a false flag operation by the left. And then at the same time, they were texting Mark Meadows, Trump needs to say something, because they knew full well that these were Trump supporters, in direct contrast to what they were saying on TV. Because if they weren't Trump supporters, why would Donald Trump need to go and make a speech? If it was Antifa, why would Antifa listen to Donald Trump? Why were they so adamant about Trump being the one to go on air and make that speech? Because they knew that these were Trump supporters. They knew that the only person these Trump supporters would listen to was Donald Trump. They knew the person that was responsible for summoning them to the Capitol on January 6th was Donald Trump. It was all blatantly obvious. It was blatantly obvious to these Fox hosts. It was blatantly obvious to every single one of these White House officials who all were begging him to make a statement. It was Pat Cipollone, Ivanka Trump, Eric Hirschman, Mark Meadows, all pushing for a stronger statement by Trump during the insurrection. He didn't give it. 187 minutes went by. He didn't say a word. He sat there gleefully and watched because these were the fruits of his labor. He spent months peppering these people with the big lie that the election was stolen, that it was fraudulent. He had Rudy Giuliani go out there, his head dripping into oblivion, peppering his viewers and supporters with claims of a stolen election, none of which he could prove in court. In fact, there was one court case where Giuliani quite literally said, "We're not here to even try to prove fraud." So this guy's whole beef this entire time was that there was fraud in the election, shows up in court, says, "Oh, I'm not here to prove fraud. I'm just, there's just some minor logistical issues that we have to take care of." Anyway, they lost 64 court cases out of 65. The only one they won was shortening a cure deadline in Pennsylvania from 9 to 6 days. That's it. In any case, they spent all of this time peppering their supporters with this idea that the election was stolen. And this was the consequence of that. This was the intended result of that. And so, of course, the guy's not going to show up and make a speech. And that is proof of his intent. Because if he had a different intent, if his intention was for these people not to go storm the Capitol, he'd have come out and said, "Don't storm the Capitol. What are you doing? This isn't what I wanted." But the fact that he didn't, the fact that he sat there gleefully, just sat in the White House on his ass and did nothing, watched TV while this was going on, is all the proof you need that this is exactly what he wanted to happen. If he didn't, he's the president with the biggest platform in the world. He'd have got on TV and told these people to go home. He'd have got on Twitter and told these people to go home. He did nothing. This is exactly what he wanted. If you needed more proof of that, you can't find it other than this. Like, that is all the proof you need. That is as clear a testament as you could possibly find of his corrupt intent. Trump is not someone to be quiet when he's not getting his way. And so the fact that he was quiet, the fact that he was giving tacit permission for this stuff to continue, is a testament to the fact that this is exactly what he intended to have happen. This is the natural consequence, the natural progression of months of peppering his supporters into believing the big lie that the election was stolen, that it was fraudulent, that some nefarious scheme had been concocted by the evil Democrats, Hugo Chavez, who died a few years earlier, and China, and whoever else, was hidden under a pizza place or in Venezuela with bamboo shoots and fake ballots in Nest thermostats. I mean, just like, my brain starts melting when I actually start thinking about the stuff that they've actually said. I mean, seriously, one of the claims here was that the election was partially rigged by the thermostats. So, if you needed like a nice little snapshot of the national discourse all these years later, that's it. It's that the right has been manipulated into thinking that an election was stolen because we turned the temperature from 74 degrees to 72 degrees. So that's how, as one does when they want to steal the election. So in any case, I think the case that they're laying out, as always, per usual, is exactly on point. It shows very clearly the extent to which Donald Trump knew there was no fraud. We've learned that since day one of these hearings. We know the extent to which all of these senior Trump campaign and senior Trump administration officials told him there was no fraud, told him there was no path to victory, told him that he had lost this election. He chose to ignore all that and convince his supporters that he lied, that the election was stolen from him anyway. And this right here, the epitome of all that, the natural result, the consequence of all of that, is happening during this 187 minutes, right after his speech at the Ellipse, where he told them outright, overtly, broadcast, in broad daylight, we're going to walk to the Capitol. He said it numerous times. They opened this hearing with exactly that. We are going to march together to the Capitol. This is exactly what he wanted. Everything went according to plan. If it didn't, he'd have used his platform, the biggest platform in the world, on TV, on Twitter, whatever it was. He had an account back then, to tell his supporters to do something differently. He didn't, because this is what he wanted. It doesn't get much clearer than that. My God, I hope the DOJ and Merrick Garland are listening. I don't know how you can draw any other conclusion than the fact that this worked out exactly according to plan from him. Every single step of the way, this is what he wanted. I guess the only thing that he didn't get in all this was to be able to join those insurrectionists himself and really validate that insurrection with his very presence. That's what he ultimately wanted. He was stopped by members of his administration and the Secret Service, probably because they knew just how egregiously illegal, egregiously felonious and unconstitutional that was. He's only in it for mildly unconstitutional in terms of optics. In any case, the committee's coming in right now. I would just ask, if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel and enjoy my breakdowns or pre-shows, post-shows that I'll do shortly, please subscribe. I'd really appreciate it.
We obtained the never-before-seen raw footage of the president recording his address to the nation that day on January 7th, more than 24 hours after the last time he had addressed the nation from the Rose Garden. Let's take a look.
Whenever you're ready, sir.
I would like to begin by addressing the heinous attack yesterday, and to those who broke the law, you will pay. You do not represent our movement, you do not represent our country, and if you broke the law, you can't say that. I already said you will pay. The demonstrators who infiltrated the Capitol, have defied the seat of it's defiled, right? See, I can't see it very well. Okay, I'll do this. I'm going to do this. Let's go. But this election is now over. Congress has certified the results. I don't want to say the election's over. I just want to say Congress has certified the results without saying the election's over, okay?
What an asshole.
But Congress is certain. Now Congress is
Yeah,
certain.
right.
Now Congress
I didn't say over, so let me see. Go to the paragraph before. Okay? I would like to begin by addressing the heinous attack yesterday. Yesterday is a hard word for me. Good. Take the word yesterday, because it doesn't work with the heinous attack on our country. Say on our country. Want to say that?
No, keep it.
My only goal was to ensure the integrity of the vote. My only goal was to ensure the integrity of the vote.
On January 7th, one day after he incited an insurrection based on a lie, President Trump still could not say that the election was over.
All right, that is the end of the last hearing. I just want to go over some points that I think are going to be that were especially impactful from this from what we just heard. We had a lot of people watching today. We had way more people tune in today. Even on this channel alone, we had 30,000 live viewers, about 250,000 in total so far. So that's just a small microcosm of what we're going to see in terms of the viewership from these committee hearings. I know that Republicans wanted nothing more than for people to tune all of this stuff out. It looks like this final committee hearing is going to have the biggest viewership of all of them. So we're going to see likely dozens of millions of people having tuned in when we get the Nielsen ratings tomorrow. So a few points that I think are especially important to go over. Most recently, these closings by Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger hit the mark on the head. I just want to point out a few quotes that I think we're going to be talking about for a few days now. Liz Cheney said, Donald Trump wasn't looking for the right answer legally or the right answer factually. He was looking for a way to remain in office. She also said, we must remember we cannot abandon the truth and remain a free nation. So really digging into the idea that this is having, the effects that this is having are going to be long lasting if these people in her own party don't stop deferring to, fealty to Donald Trump over the truth. Adam Kinzinger, a few quotes that I think were important were, he said, oaths matter, character matters, truth matters. If we do not renew our faith and commitment to these principles, our shining beacon on a hill will not endure. He also said, within minutes of stepping off the ellipse stage, Trump knew about the violent attack on the Capitol from the comfort of his dining room. He watched TV as the attack escalated. He sent tweets that expressed support for the desire of some to literally kill the Vice President Mike Pence. And I think that's the one I want to focus on here because this whole committee focused on these 187 minutes between Trump leaving the ellipse stage, and that ellipse stage was important too because he literally said, I'm going to be marching with you to the Capitol. He tried to. He was ultimately stopped by members of his own administration staff and members of the Secret Service, but why that was important is that would have quite literally been him leading the insurrection, physically leading an armed insurrection, and he knew it was armed. The Secret Service knew it was armed. There were people with AR-15s and pistols, quite literally leading an armed insurrection. His staff in the Secret Service said, ain't no way this is gonna happen. You wanna talk about legal exposure for everything else that's happened thus far. This would just make all of that look like child's play if Trump was physically leading an armed insurrection to the U.S. Capitol to stop certification of his election loss, so that he could unilaterally anoint himself the winner of that lost election. But I think the important part is this entire time, Donald Trump knew that, within minutes of him leaving that stage, knew that there was an armed attack on our Capitol. And for all of that time, while he had a number of his administration officials, while he had people like Pat Cipollone, Ivanka Trump, Eric Hirschman, Mark Meadows, all pushing for him to make a statement. He opted to do nothing for hours. He sat there giddy watching this stuff happen on TV. And I think that's one of the strongest elements of corrupt intent that you could possibly find, because Donald Trump is not known, like, we know who he is. He's not known to be somebody who's just going to quietly allow something to happen if he doesn't approve of it. There's not a single shred of his day where he doesn't make his feelings be known. You know, like any random errant synapse fires in his brain, any thought flitters across his mind, and that thought will fall out of his face and end up on Twitter, on TV, wherever he has the ability to make people hear him. If he wanted these people to go home sooner, if this wasn't his intention for these people to storm the Capitol like they did, he'd have said something. It's as simple as that. And yet, his silence is as clear a testament as you could possibly find that what these people were doing was exactly his desire. It's exactly what he wanted. If it wasn't, he'd have said something. And in fact, we learned multiple times over from his statements, including these outtakes during his own prepared remarks, that he refused to allude to the fact that anything these people were doing was wrong, or that it wasn't justified, or that he didn't win the election, or that even the election outcome was settled. Every single mention of those things he refused to say, and we saw his thought process play out in real time because we have these outtakes. But what these people were doing was exactly what he wanted. If it wasn't, he'd have said something. And those people knew that. We learned from the last committee hearing, when there's Trump supporter, I can't remember his name, but that Trump supporter came forward and he said, I showed up because it's the one thing Donald Trump asked for me to do. And then he said, had Trump told me to leave earlier, I would have. That guy ended up breaching the Capitol anyway. He pled guilty. But he said outright, Trump told me to leave, I would have. These people were all there because they knew they were summoned by him. For him, by him. And by the way, everybody knew that. Even these Fox hosts were so desperate. And I talked about this in that little middle part during the recess. These Fox hosts were so adamant about Mark Meadows reaching out to Trump to get him to make a statement. Why? Because while they were spouting off on air about this being Antifa, they knew that in reality these were Trump supporters. And Trump supporters would only listen to one person, and that was Donald Trump. And so they'll go on air publicly and say, oh, we think it's Antifa, we think this is a false flag, we think this is the radical left trying to frame our dear president, the victim in all of this. And yet desperately texting Mark Meadows, he's got to put an end to this. Don Jr. texting Mark Meadows, go to the mattresses, which I think was funny that he said that he made a Godfather reference. Of course this guy's going to make a mob boss reference when he's talking about his own dad, just as an aside. But all of these people knew that he was responsible for this. Even though they said something else publicly, they knew he was responsible for this. That's why they were so adamant about him being the one to tell these people to go home. He knew exactly what he was doing. All of this was by design. So that proves corrupt intent, in addition to the fact that all of the information we had leading up to this, from all of the 7 other January 6th committee hearings, where we heard from people like Bill Barr, Eric Hirschman, Ivanka Trump, Jared, Alex Cannon, Jason Miller, all of whom had direct access to this guy, who testified that they'd spoken to Trump, that they'd spoken to his team, that they'd conceded that there was no fraud in this election, no widespread fraud, that he knew there was no path to victory. He knew all of these things, and yet he opted to pepper his supporters with a big lie anyway. Because his intent here wasn't the pursuit of any facts or the truth. His intent was to knowingly deceive the people who trusted him, to the point where they showed up to the U.S. Capitol, breached the Capitol to try to kill the vice president because they thought such a crime had been committed, such an injustice had been committed, that they were the last hope at stepping in and trying to seek some justice for this guy. That's how much they'd been manipulated by Donald Trump, who himself knew the truth because he'd been told by these people. They testified under oath that he'd been told. All of these depositions, under oath, Bill Barr, Alex Cannon, Jason Miller, Ivanka Trump, Hirschman, even Eastman, the architect of this scheme for Pence to be able to unilaterally overturn the election results. Eastman said in his sworn deposition that that there was no way the Supreme Court would even come close to upholding his election theft scheme. This idea that the vice president can just decide at the end of the day who really becomes the president. As if we didn't just all live through Al Gore having to himself preside over this exact same thing while he was running for president. What a joke. What a joke. Any way you cut this committee has laid out masterfully over the last several weeks, couple of months. If they're doing it for our benefit as the general public, for the DOJ's benefit, in any way you cut it, there is no way that you can look at this and see anything other than an airtight case for the DOJ to move forward with prosecution. There is no way to suggest that Donald Trump didn't move forward with criminal intent, with corrupt intent, to knowingly defraud his supporters because he knew the truth and yet lied anyway, so that he could ultimately block certification of the election, which is unconstitutional, which is a violation of his oath of office, which is a crime, on top of a number of other crimes, which I won't get into because what's the point? Like, we have exactly what we need right here. Just as an aside too, I thought it was especially funny that they, especially telling that they had that whole outtake reel from Donald Trump having trouble with pretty medium-sized words, like there was the word yesterday, defiled. So again, not the easiest words in the world. They're medium-sized words, but they're still pretty basic words. And I seem to remember some conservatives online giving Biden a pretty tough time over his use of a teleprompter. So I'm sure they'll be laying into Donald Trump any second now, because we know that their standards are pretty high when it comes to teleprompter reading. I'll bet if Biden couldn't say the word yesterday, got caught on tape having that much trouble with the word yesterday, my God, we wouldn't hear the end of it. So I'm sure they'll be coming out in droves any minute now. Something else telling from this committee hearing, in the evening of January 6th, Rudy Giuliani was still, after the insurrection attempt, still trying to get members of Congress to further delay election certification. He said if we could just get a little bit more of a delay, we can get this thing sent back to the states. He was still trying to do this after the coup attempt. It didn't deter him, it emboldened him. If you needed any more proof that that's exactly what the point of this was for, there you go. It's Rudy Giuliani, who was the number one person on Team Crazy, although Sidney Powell, I'm sure, is giving him quite one hell of a run for his money. Him still trying to get these members of Congress, the Tommy Tubervilles, the Lindsey Grahams, to delay certification to get him sent back to the states so that they could send an alternate slate of electors and continue pushing these completely whacked out bullshit schemes to get the election. They're still doing it. Donald Trump just reached out to the speaker in Wisconsin to get them to overturn the election results. Like this week. This week, he's still doing it. And that's the thing. I just want to talk about the DOJ for a second, because at this point, it's not just about accountability for what Trump did in the past. It really isn't. It's also about what Trump will do in the future, and we know he'll do it. There's no doubt about the fact that he'll do it, because he's still doing it to this very day. This week, he's still doing it. The previous week, we learned from Liz Cheney that he's still trying to intimidate witnesses, him personally, reaching out to witnesses to try to get them to know that he's going to be watching their hearings, their depositions during January 6th committee hearings. He's still doing it, and he'll continue to do it. If you are not deterred from committing crimes when there is an entire committee composed of bipartisan members of Congress looking to make sure that they build a case strong enough that the DOJ has no choice but to prosecute you, if that doesn't deter you from committing crimes, even as the committee is happening in real time, nothing will. You will continue committing crimes. So at this point, if Merrick Garland and the DOJ don't see that and recognize that it is their job to stop him from committing these crimes any further, and the only way they can do that is by prosecuting him, otherwise he will continue to do it because he's continuing to do it today, then I don't know what else to say if they can't recognize that. The only way this stops, he's not going to be shamed into doing the right thing. He's not going to be pressured into doing the right thing. He's not going to be scared into doing the right thing. He's not going to be threatened into doing the right thing. This committee has any normal person. You have an entire congressional investigation dedicated solely to making sure that they take you down for what you've done. You'd be pretty batshit scared, I would imagine. Probably not feeling too good. This guy's out committing witness intimidation in real time. In real time, still calling the Wisconsin legislature to overturn the election results like this week. If Merrick Garland can't look at that and recognize that it is his job to put a stop to this, not just to hold him accountable for what he did, but to prevent him from what he is still trying to do to this very day and what he will continue to try to do into the future, if he can't recognize that, then the next one's on him. I use this analogy in the pre-show, but, you know, if you're watching a guy rob 6 banks, and he did it 18 months ago, he knows he robbed 6 banks, the whole town knows he robbed 6 banks, the cops know he robbed 6 banks, the news knows he's robbed 6 banks, and the cops still haven't done anything to hold him accountable. It's been a year and a half, and then all of a sudden they see him outside that 7th bank, getting ready to rob that 7th bank, and still the cops don't do anything. Who are you going to blame more? At some point, your attention turns away from the person committing the crimes and onto the people whose job it is to prevent it or hold them accountable, who are not doing anything. It's not just going to be blood on Donald Trump's hands, it's going to be blood on the DOJ's hands if and when this happens again, if they fail to hold him accountable. I can't stress that enough. And so I have no doubt that they feel this pressure right now, because how could you not? There have been 8 committee hearings, like I've said, millions upon millions of Americans and people across the world, I know people are watching this from all over, have seen what's happening right now, and there is a ton of pressure on them. So it is my hope to the end of the earth that Garland and the DOJ don't focus on this idea of, like, we don't want to have any optics of partisanship or being political. We just want to do our investigation without any optics. The optics don't matter. There's going to be optics of partisanship anyway, because Donald Trump's a Republican and we live in a polarized society, and people already believe, regardless of what you do, that this is a politically charged investigation. That's baked into the cake. That's done. That ship has sailed. It already looks partisan. You're not going to change anybody's mind. So at this point, knowing that there's nothing you can do to change people's minds about this looking like a partisan investigation because it is inherently political, just do the right thing. That's it. Just hold them accountable. Just do your job. That's all we can ask for. Stop worrying about the optics of what you're doing and just focus on what you are doing. Don't worry about the optics of justice and just uphold justice. That's it. That is your only job. One more thing. Josh Hawley running away like a spineless jellyfish. Running away. This is the guy who helped embolden these insurrectionists with his fist of solidarity. The second that he felt like he might be in danger, sprinting across that picture, that video of him sprinting across the screen, scared, running from one side of the hallway to the other, running away from the mob that he himself helped incite. What a little bitch. I'm sorry. What a little bitch. I hope that video, I know that these people are incapable of shame, but I hope that video follows him for the rest of his life. I hope that is what defines his political career. This guy had the audacity to stand there and raise his fist in solidarity with these insurrectionists. And then he turns around, and the second he feels like he might be personally inconvenienced by them, sprints out of the way, runs to safety. And of course, the last thing, I believe it's the last thing that Josh Hawley tweeted was, about to join Tucker Carlson on Fox News, tune in. Are you running over to Fox, Josh? Man, these people just the depths of humanity. Anyway, I think on that note, that's where we'll leave it. I can't think of a better place to stop than than talking about Josh Hawley. Josh Hawley is just utter spinelessness. In any case, I hope the pre-show and the live stream and this little wrap-up were helpful. If you enjoyed it, I would please ask if you could please subscribe to this channel. That's the best way to support what I do. I don't ask for money or anything like that. You don't have to join my channel or anything like that, but if you could please subscribe, that is the best way to support me. And I mentioned this in the pre-show as well, but I'll mention it again now. I would also recommend that you, if you're watching and you're not subscribed to a lot of progressive channels, go find some progressive channels and subscribe to those as well, and click like on some videos and get those engagement numbers up, because the progressive media ecosystem as a whole is like, you know, that's where people get their news. That's how people get fed into this system. I only started using YouTube like a few years ago. All of my initial videos were like Daily Caller, Ben Shapiro, Dan Bongino. That is where I got fed immediately. Realized I was in like some, you know, I was getting fed a bunch of right-wing videos. That's why I started doing what I do on these videos, because there was a giant void in left-wing content. So I would just ask for you guys to, you know, find other progressive outlets like mine, like Crooked, Pacman, Kalinsky, TYT, Midas, you know all the same ones, and you know, the ones that we know. And make sure Beau of the Fifth Column, Majority Report. Make sure you subscribe to those and support these people, because you know this is a major line of defense. And as more people get their news from YouTube, like I do, I don't even have TV. I get all of my news from the computer. You know, we're gonna be relying on that ecosystem to bring more people in and serve them the truth, and also, like, you know, more broadly, just keep them out of that right-wing, that dangerous, like, right-wing rabbit hole that a lot of people get sucked into, and some pretty dark stuff happens as a result of that. So, in any case, support independent progressive media as much as you can, and I'll leave it there. So, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the analysis here. One last note, and this is important. I haven't announced this to anybody else other than just on this live stream, but I interviewed the Vice President, Kamala Harris, yesterday. I'll be releasing that interview this weekend. So if you want to check out that interview as soon as it drops, subscribe to my channel, hit the bell so that you get notified. And I had about 20 minutes with the Vice President, so that comes out in just a couple of days. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that. Okay, that's it. And thank you so much for watching. I'll be back with these regular videos tomorrow, interviews throughout the weekend, and these next January 6th committee hearings into September. So stick around, and as soon as they come back up, I'll be back here again. Thank you guys for watching. I'll talk to you soon.